This is Mac OS Ken.
iPhone can't stop not stopping. Apple fights bad guys from the future. And sports. It is Thursday, the 22nd of February, 2024. I'm Ken Ray, and this is news from Mac OS Ken. Brought to you by yours truly and supported by people like you, patrons through Patreon. Find out more and add your support at patreon.com/MacOSKen. Another report of iPhone crushing all comers in 2023. Counterpoint research says Apple's communicator filled 7 of the top 10 smartphone spots in the firm's global monthly handset model sales tracker for all of last year. That said, the races for 6th, 7th, and 8th were tight. Those 3 phones made up 1.4% of the global market share each. These numbers are crazy. First, showing just how many small scraps of silicon and screens there are out there, Counterpoint says last year was the first year that the top 10 smartphones accounted for as much as 20% of the global market. That squeaked past 2022's 19%, though one wonders whether they'd have gone higher had Apple had enough iPhone 14s to go around a couple of years ago. Want another crazy number? Phones 8, 9, and 10 on last year's list were made by Samsung. All top 10 smartphones, accounting for 20% of the global market, were made by 2 companies. Running down the list, the entry-level iPhone 14 was first. Counterpoint says the US and China made up half of its sales, and it contributed 19% of the total iPhone sales for 2023. iPhone 14 Pro Max was second, iPhone 14 Pro was third. iPhone 13, Apple's oldest phone on the list, took fourth, thanks in large part to growth in India and Japan. According to the release, carrier promotions in Japan drove sales of older iPhones over the newer generation, while in India, the iPhone 13's value proposition made it a popular choice. Rounding out Apple's Magnificent 7 were iPhone 15 Pro Max in 5th, iPhone 15 Pro in 6th, and iPhone 15 in 7th. Look for those to do well on next year's list. Counterpoint says the iPhone 15 series took the top 3 spots on the global bestseller list for the 4th quarter of last year, with iPhone 15 Pro Max becoming the best-selling smartphone. Apple rivals lobby EU over App Store dominance, read a headline Wednesday from the Financial Times. That was followed by a lot of stuff I honestly thought we'd heard already. After going over changes Apple announced last month tied to Digital Markets Act, or DMA, compliance in the European Union, the report had Phil Spencer, Microsoft's gaming chief, saying, "The initial steps to comply with the DMA that Apple has put forward are very prohibitive to us actually creating a meaningful alternative to the one store that's available on the world's largest gaming platforms, which are mobile phones. So we will continue to work with regulators to open that up." Additionally, the report said Meta chief executive Mark Zuckerberg has also dismissed Apple's proposal as onerous and at odds with the intent of the EU regulation, saying he would be surprised if any developer chose to go into the alternative app stores. Now, I'm not sure about the Spencer quote, but I know that quote from Zuckerberg is old news. That said, the premise of the headline is likely correct. Microsoft and Meta do seem set on lobbying the EU to land on Apple's head. Financial Times says backlash from M&M and others has left the European Commission, the EU's executive arm, with the dilemma of deciding whether years of work on the new legislation aimed at digital gatekeepers has had its desired effect on Apple, and whether it can sanction the company for failing to comply. The piece says the EU can sanction gatekeepers for non-compliance as soon as the DMA goes into effect, which happens on the 7th of March. At that point, the union could fine Apple and other gatekeepers up to 10% of their annual turnover, rising to 20% in repeat cases. Now perhaps you're thinking, if only Apple had talked to the EU along the way, Well, it did. Or it says it did anyway. According to the Financial Times piece, Apple said it spent months in conversation with the European Commission about the DMA, and that its plan reflects the work of hundreds of Apple team members who spent tens of thousands of hours on the solution. Old news or no, Apple has responded to the Microsoft and Meta contentions. A piece from Apple Insider had an Apple spokesperson telling that site Wednesday that its DMA plans had two objectives: complying with the law and reducing what Apple calls the inevitable increased risks the DMA creates for users in the European Union. How seriously does Apple take privacy and security? So seriously, it's apparently fighting bad guys from the future. A piece from TechCrunch says Apple announced Wednesday that it is upgrading iMessages security layer to post-quantum cryptography. The changes, coming in iOS and iPadOS 17.4, macOS 14.4, and watchOS 10.4, will guard against a time when quantum computers could break encryption. Did you hear about ChatGPT pulling all kinds of nutties midweek this week? The Joker once said, "You can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs," but I don't remember agreeing to be in this omelet. I know that sounds non sequitur, mostly because it is. Thinking of going as ChatGPT for Halloween. Anyway, we know there are computers coming that will be able to break today's encryption. Or we think there are anyway. TechCrunch says Apple and other companies believe future quantum computers capable of exponentially faster computations could break today's encryption standards. According to Apple, a sufficiently powerful quantum computer could solve these classical mathematical problems in fundamentally different ways, and therefore, in theory, do so fast enough to threaten the security of end-to-end encrypted communications. To fight that, Apple has come up with what it calls the PQ3 protocol. That will hit with the next round of OS updates. When it does, Apple indicates that it will apply to all new iMessage conversations and older messages by refreshing session keys for prior conversations. The punchline: TechCrunch says since this system is new and we are years away from the general availability of quantum computing power, there is no practical way to measure the efficacy of Apple's post-quantum protocol. Well, fingers crossed, I guess. And now sports. No, we're not talking about soccer yet. We're talking about a new app from Apple. The Cupertino company issued a press release Wednesday announcing Apple Sports, a free app for iPhone that gives sports fans access to real-time scores, stats, and more. Lots of leagues covered by this app, including NBA, NCAA basketball, men's and women's, NHL, MLS, Bundesliga, La Liga, Liga MX, League One, Premier League, and Serie A. And that is 7 soccer leagues for those keeping score at home. Additional leagues will become available according to the company, including MLB, NFL, NCAA football, men's and men's, National Women's Soccer League, and the WNBA for their upcoming seasons. Now, I've said more than once that I'm not much of a sports guy, but having downloaded this app, I get the appeal. Designed for speed and simplicity, Apple says the app's personalized experience puts users' favorite leagues and teams front and center, featuring an easy-to-use interface. That seems true. I put in 4 teams about which I kinda care, and the app populated with current and upcoming games. Tap on those, and there are all sorts of stats that, if I really cared, would be really handy. What I'd really like now would be the ability to pull sports out of the news app. You know, since there's a whole sports app for sports. Of course, I'd also like $1 million and a pony. I'd settle for the $1 million. As promised, the sports app is free. It's available now in the App Store for Canada, the UK, and the US. And finally today, sports. And yes, we're talking about soccer this time. The 2024 MLS season got underway last night with Inter Miami CF hosting Real Salt Lake. The score was either something something, something nothing, nothing something, or nothing nothing after what could have been a blowout or a nail-biter or a seemingly motionless tug of war. This is being written before the game was played. If you want to know how it went, I hear there's an app for that. No, I'll not be bringing pretend soccer scores for the whole season. I only bring it up today because Apple issued a press release yesterday reminding people that MLS Season Pass on Apple TV is still a thing for which they can pay. It's available for $14.99 a month or $12.99 for Apple TV Plus subscribers. Folks can also pay for the full season, $99 for the year or $79 with that Apple TV Plus discount. The press release also teased an upcoming soccer-centric something for Apple Vision Pro, shot in 8K, presented in 3D immersive video, covering the best of the 2023 MLS Cup playoffs. Not much more to tell, which is fine. I'm guessing the overlap in the Venn diagram of people who own an Apple Vision Pro, who are super into soccer, and listening to this show right now might not be non-existent, but probably not huge. macOS Ken, brought to you by me and supported by people like you, patrons through Patreon. Find out more and add your support at patreon.com/macOSKen. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media, online at backbeatmedia.com. You can reach me a couple of ways. info@macosken.com or call 716-780-4080. Until next time, that is news from macOS Ken. I'm Ken Ray.
Ciao.